It's early July 1940, and along the coast of occupied France, German fighter pilots are living their best lives. They're sprawled on beach chairs in Calais, sipping champagne looted from French cellars, staring across 21 miles of English Channel water like tourists eyeing their next vacation spot. Except these aren't tourists. They're the Luftwaffe, and Britain is about to become, in their minds, the easiest conquest in their already impressive collection. You have to understand where these guys were coming from mentally. In just 8 months, they'd steamrolled through Poland in 27 days, carved through Denmark in 6 hours, conquered Norway, smashed through Holland, Belgium and Luxembourg, and made France, the supposed military superpower with the world's largest army, surrender in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe had rewritten every textbook on modern warfare, and German pilots had personal kill counts that made them feel invincible. Guys like Werner Mulders and Adolf Galland were already aces several times over. Their Messerschmitt Bf-10 decorated with victory bars that ran out of room on the fuselage. Now they're looking at Britain, and honestly, they're not even trying to hide their contempt. The Luftwaffe had lost fewer than 1,000 aircraft taking down France's Air Force of over 4,000 planes. In their eyes, the Royal Air Force, RAF, was next, and it would be even easier. Why? Because the British were, and this is the actual phrase German intelligence used, a nation of shopkeepers. This wasn't just regular trash talk. This was institutional arrogance baked into German military culture. Napoleon had used that phrase dismissively about Britain over a century earlier, and now Hitler's commanders were recycling it like it was fresh insight. The math seemed simple to Luftwaffe High Command. RAF Fighter Command had maybe 600 operational fighters. The Luftwaffe had nearly 2,800 aircraft positioned in France, Belgium, Holland, and Norway, almost 2,400 of them bombers, backed by about 800 single-engine fighters and 300 twin-engine Bf-110 destroyer fighters. Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarshal commanding the Luftwaffe, told his pilots they'd crush British air resistance in 4 days. 4 days. Then the invasion, Operation Sea Lion, would proceed. German boots would march through London, and Churchill would be begging for terms by autumn. German aircrews genuinely believed this. When they gathered in their mess halls near Cherbourg or Le Havre, the conversations weren't about if they'd win, but about who'd get the most kills before the RAF collapsed entirely. Some pilots were annoyed they might not rack up enough victories before it was over. There was actual competition over who'd shoot down the last RAF fighter. They'd seen British Spitfires and Hurricanes during the Dunkirk evacuation in late May and early June, sure. The RAF had fought hard covering the retreat, but the British Expeditionary Force had still been driven into the sea. In German eyes, that was a loss, and losses meant your Air Force was second-rate. Nobody in the Luftwaffe High Command seriously questioned whether Britain could defend itself. The question was just how quickly they'd fold. The Luftwaffe's dismissive attitude wasn't just ego. It was backed by what they thought was solid intelligence. German reconnaissance had been photographing British airfields since May, and what they saw confirmed their biases. RAF squadrons looked undermanned. Hangars appeared half-empty. The intelligence reports flowing into Luftwaffe headquarters painted a picture of an air force still reeling from losses. Over France and Dunkirk, struggling to replace pilots and planes faster than they were losing them. What really fed German contempt was how British fighters actually fought. Luftwaffe pilots had watched RAF formations during the France campaign, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The British were still flying in tight parade ground formations, neat little V-shapes called Vicks with 3 aircraft wingtip to wingtip, looking pretty but tactically idiotic. German fighter doctrine had evolved, past this years earlier during the Spanish Civil War. They flew in pairs, a leader and a wingman with space between them, giving each pilot room to maneuver and watch for threats. The Luftwaffe called it the rotor, and it was brutally effective. British formations, by contrast, were so tight that pilots spent more time avoiding mid-air collisions with their own squadron mates than watching for enemy fighters. The number 2 and number 3 in each Vic had to focus constantly on holding formation, which meant only the leader could actually scan for threats. It was flying like it was still 1918, all about looking disciplined rather than staying alive. German pilots literally called it flying like schoolboys on parade. Adolf Galland, who'd become one of Germany's top aces, wrote in his diary that attacking RAF formations was like shooting wooden ducks at a carnival. Then there was the equipment assessment, which was equally dismissive. German intelligence had identified the Hawker Hurricane as the RAF's primary fighter, and they weren't wrong. Hurricanes made up about 60% of Fighter Command's strength. But the Hurricane was fabric-covered, slower than the Bf-109, and in the German view, obsolete. Some Luftwaffe briefings literally described it as inferior in every measurable way. The Supermarine Spitfire got more respect. But even then, German pilots figured they had the edge. The Bf-109E, the Emil variant they were flying, could outdive any British fighter, had fuel injection that let it push negative, G maneuvers the British couldn't match, and packed heavier firepower with its nose-mounted cannon. But here's where continental victories really poisoned German assessment. They'd beaten everyone by doing the exact same thing. The formula worked in Poland, overwhelmed them with numbers and speed. It worked in France, smashed through with coordinated bomber fighter strikes. So why wouldn't it work over Britain? German intelligence officers weren't looking for what made Britain different. They were looking for confirmation that Britain would fold the same way everyone else had. Pilot quality was another assumption built on shaky ground. Luftwaffe crews knew their own training was intensive. German fighter pilots averaged 240 flight hours before combat. They'd heard British training programs were rushed, pushing pilots to squadrons with barely 100 hours of flight time. What they didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that many RAF pilots were combat veterans from France, and the others were being trained by combat veterans, who'd learned hard lessons quickly. The Luftwaffe assumed inexperience meant incompetence. That assumption was about to cost them dearly. While German pilots were congratulating themselves on their inevitable victory, they were completely blind to three game-changing advantages the British possessed. The first and most critical was something the Luftwaffe didn't even know existed in operational form: radar. Britain had spent the late 1930s building a chain of radar stations along its southern and eastern coasts called Chain Home. By July 1940, there were over 50 of these stations operational, with those distinctive steel towers reaching 350 feet into the sky. These weren't primitive early warning systems. They could detect incoming aircraft formations at ranges up to 120 miles and altitudes up to 25,000 feet. German intelligence had photographed the towers, but their analysts concluded they were either experimental or part of some kind of naval communication system. Nothing in German thinking accepted that the British had turned detection into an integrated defensive network. The Luftwaffe planned their strategy around surprise and overwhelming force. But Chain Home changed everything. RAF controllers could see German formations assembling over France, track them across the channel, calculate their heading and altitude, and vector British fighters to intercept at the exact right position and height. The Luftwaffe kept wondering why RAF squadrons were always waiting for them at the perfect altitude. The second advantage was the aircraft themselves. And here, German intelligence had really dropped the ball. Yes, the Hurricane was fabric-covered and slower than the Bf-109, but it was also rugged, stable as a gun platform, and could outturn German fighters in a dogfight. More importantly, it carried 8 303 Browning machine guns that could pour out 9,600 rounds per minute combined. The Spitfire, meanwhile, wasn't just competitive with the Bf-109. In many ways, it was superior. Below 20,000 feet, the Spitfire could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver the Emil. Its elliptical wings gave it a tighter turning circle than anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. German pilots who'd fought Spitfires during Dunkirk knew this, but their reports were dismissed as excuses for losses. The third advantage was simple geography, but its implications were massive. RAF pilots were fighting over their own territory. When a Spitfire got shot down over Kent, the pilot could bail out, land in a farmer's field, get picked up by the local home guard, and be back in the cockpit within hours, sometimes the same day. When a Bf-109 got shot down over England, that pilot was either dead or captured, and that aircraft was gone forever. Even worse for the Germans, their fighters only had enough fuel for about 30 minutes of combat over Britain before they had to turn back. RAF pilots could fight until their ammunition ran out, land at their home base 10 minutes away, rearm, refuel, and go back up. The Luftwaffe was fighting with one hand tied behind their back, and they'd done it to themselves. The first real test came on July 10, 1940. The date historians now mark as the official start of the Battle of Britain. A large formation of Dornier Do-17 bombers, escorted by Bf-109s and Bf-110s, attacked a British convoy in the channel near Dover. The Luftwaffe expected light resistance. Instead, they got hit by 6 Hurricane squadrons that had been vectored to intercept, with perfect timing and altitude advantage. The Germans lost 13 aircraft that day. The RAF lost 6. That should have been a wake-up call, but German command rationalized it away. Göring's staff reported that British resistance was stronger than anticipated, but temporary. Through mid-July, the Canal Kampf, the Channel battle, intensified. On July 13th, a massive raid on Portland Harbor saw Hurricanes and Spitfires ambush the bomber formations before the escorts could react. The Bf-110 destroyer fighters, which were supposed to be able to handle British fighters while protecting bombers, got absolutely shredded. By the end of July, some Bf-110 units were losing aircraft so fast they had to be withdrawn to refit. Hauptmann Hannes Trautloft, commanding an elite Jagdgeschwader, wrote after a July 19th engagement. The British pilots fight with unexpected determination. Their courage cannot be questioned. But then, in the next paragraph, he's back to predicting the RAF will break within days. The evidence in front of them contradicted everything they'd been told. But the institutional momentum was too strong to question. August 8th saw a huge raid target a convoy in the Channel codenamed Peewit. The Luftwaffe threw everything at it, losing 31 aircraft while the RAF lost 19. Again, German intelligence reports spun it as a success, because British defensive strength continues to diminish. August 12th saw the first concentrated attacks on chain, home radar stations. The Luftwaffe managed to knock a few offline temporarily, but they fundamentally didn't understand what they were hitting. By the next morning, most stations were back on the air, and German bombers were still being intercepted with eerie precision. August 15th, 1940. The Luftwaffe called it the greatest day, a massive coordinated assault from 3 directions designed to overwhelm RAF defenses once and for all. Göring had approved an audacious plan. Simultaneous attacks from France, the Low Countries, and for the first time from Luftwaffe 5 bases in Norway and Denmark. The Northern Force, expecting virtually no resistance, became the bloodiest day in Luftwaffe history. What they found instead of weak defenses was 12 Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons waiting at altitude, because once again Chain Home had seen them coming from 90 miles out. Of the nearly 100 aircraft that started the mission from Norway, 30 didn't make it home. While that disaster unfolded up north, the southern raids weren't going much better. 5 massive waves hit targets from Kent to Hampshire. But instead of catching the RAF weakened and scattered, German formations ran into coordinated resistance at every turn. By dusk, Luftwaffe crews staggered back to their French bases and counted losses. 75 aircraft destroyed, another 30 damaged so badly they'd take weeks to repair. Over 170 aircrew killed or captured. The RAF had lost 34 aircraft, and of those pilots, 13 were back flying within 48 hours. It wasn't even close. The documents that survived from German pilots in late August and September 1940 tell a story that official Luftwaffe communiques desperately tried to suppress. This wasn't just about losing aircraft. It was about watching your certainty crumble every single sortie. Ulrich Steinhilper, a Bf-109 pilot with Jagdgeschwader 52, had diary entries from early July that read like vacation notes. By August 20th, after he'd lost 3 wingmen in 10 days, the tone changed completely. We turned for home with fuel warnings screaming, and they follow us halfway across the channel. Who are these pilots? Where do they keep coming from? The psychological breaking point for many German pilots was the Spitfire. In early sorties, encountering a Spitfire was notable, but not terrifying. By late August, Spitfires haunted German bomber crews like demons. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff described it in his post-war memoir. You'd see them coming, those elliptical wings, and your stomach would drop. Bomber. Crews started reporting. mysterious engine failures, and navigation errors that forced them to turn back before reaching targets. A lot of it wasn't legitimate mechanical trouble. Werner Mulders, one of Germany's most decorated aces, filed a brutally honest assessment on August 22nd that got him temporarily censured. The British pilot fights with tenacity and skill that equals our own. Their aircraft are not inferior. Our numerical advantage is negated by their defensive system, which remains impenetrable to our intelligence. Continuation of current operations will result in unsustainable attrition. That's not the language of a man expecting victory. The losses on August 15th detonated through German high command like a hand grenade in a staff meeting. Göring was screaming at his intelligence chief, demanding to know how RAF Fighter Command still had unlimited reserves when reports said they were down to their last squadrons. Oberst Josef Beppo Schmid, the head of Luftwaffe intelligence, had no good answers. His August 16th report to Göring was a masterpiece of bureaucratic backpedaling. British fighter strength has been consistently underestimated. Current operational capacity appears to be 600-700 aircraft rather than the 300 previously assessed. In other words, they'd been wrong about everything from day one. Hitler received his briefing on August 17th, and for the first time, Operation Sea Lion wasn't discussed with confidence. Admiral Raeder told Hitler bluntly that landing troops on British beaches while the RAF still controlled the skies would be a suicide mission on a national scale. The earliest invasion date was quietly pushed back. By late August, Göring made a catastrophic strategic pivot that looked like desperation. He ordered the Luftwaffe to shift focus to London itself. Starting September 7th, the Blitz began. It took pressure off fighter commands, battered airfields, and gave them time to recover. Historians now recognize this as the moment Germany lost the Battle of Britain, though nobody in Berlin was ready to admit it yet. The postponements kept coming. Operation Sea Lion was officially postponed on September 17th, then indefinitely suspended on October 12th. By mid-October, the Luftwaffe had lost over 1,700 aircraft since July. RAF Fighter Command, which was supposed to collapse in 4 days, was stronger than when the campaign started. The ripple effects redefined Germany's entire war strategy. Hitler's attention shifted east to the Soviet Union. Directive number 21. The plan for Operation Barbarossa was drafted in December 1940. The decision to invade the Soviet Union in June 1941, which ultimately destroyed Nazi Germany, was directly influenced by the failure to break Britain in 1940. The Luftwaffe's myth of invincibility died over England. Here's the thing about the Luftwaffe's failure over Britain. It wasn't unique. It's a pattern that keeps repeating throughout military history. Look at the United States in Vietnam, the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, or Russia invading Ukraine in 2022. Commanders in all these conflicts had the same swagger the Luftwaffe had in 1940. They looked at their opponent. Guerrillas in black pajamas, medieval tribesmen, or a supposedly weak post-Soviet military and dismissed them as technologically backward, poorly trained, and fighting with inferior tactics. What makes arrogance so deadly in warfare isn't just that it causes strategic mistakes. It creates institutional blindness that prevents learning and adaptation. When the Luftwaffe encountered evidence that contradicted their assumptions, they explained it away rather than revising their strategy. That's what doomed them. You can have better equipment, more resources, and superior numbers. Your opponent and refuse to update your assessment when reality proves you wrong, you lose. The lesson from August 15, 1940 isn't just about aerial combat. It's about what happens when you let contempt replace analysis. Those German pilots sitting on the French coast in July had every reason to feel confident until reality taught them that confidence without respect is just a different word for suicide. The RAF wasn't amateur. They were fighting for their survival on their own soil with tools the Luftwaffe never bothered to understand.